Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us. So Maya, did I introduce you well?
Yes, very well.
Did I forget
Excellent
anything?
Job. No,
so you are based in Geneva?
Yes, I am.
So there is actually a group of people working from Geneva. And can you tell us a little bit about Article 36 in more details?
Yes, so Article 36 is an NGO, civil society organization, that's based in the UK and that works towards the public scrutiny of the development and use of weapon systems with a view to promote disarmament and prevent humanitarian harm.
So, you know, autonomous robots, there is a lot of fantasy about what it means. Hollywood didn't help us with like Terminator-style machines. What are we talking about concretely when we hear the word autonomous killer robots or whatever people want to call it?
Yeah, it's a good question, and there isn't one single truth, one single answer to that. What we have in mind generally is systems, weaponized systems, that once activated would be able to detect, select, and target people and objects independently from human intervention.
System is a suspectly unprecise word, so it can take a lot of different forms, I guess.
Exactly. And that's one of the challenges that we face today, is that we don't know what kinds of forms these systems could take. But what we do know is that the concern for the campaign and for Article 36 is not autonomous systems like autonomous vehicles like cars, right? It's not autonomy in the sense that they can navigate autonomously. It's also not, the concern is also not with armed drones as they are used in present practice, because their human beings, human operators are still involved in the final decision to kill.
So that's what you mean when you say autonomous. Basically, it's a machine that can by itself make the decision to kill a human being.
Yeah, so what it would do is, how we would imagine this working is, these are systems composed of various soft and hardware elements that can be geographically distributed and then operate together to, at some point in time, constitute an autonomous weapon system. So they will have to have sensors of some sort, they will have to have a weapon platform and the actual warhead or whatever munition is used to effect the military.
So the word system, what you mean by that is that, you know, we expect a human-looking robot to come to us, and it's likely not what's happening. What you're saying is that it's going to be satellites taking pictures of the field, GPS to guide some drones, computers maybe back in the country that launched these weapons, analyzing the images in real time. So it's really different components that are going to be deployed. It's not one single device.
Yeah, that's what we have in mind, or that's at least one of the possibilities. And so when the media use the image of the Terminator to accompany their stories, then that's slightly misleading, perhaps. So that's certainly only part of what is coming our way potentially. Although, of course, robotic systems are very likely to be part of such potential autonomous weapon systems.
There is. I mean, it's kind of a new topic. It came on my radar a couple of years ago, I think, through Human Rights Watch. Why now? Why did you start working on it now? Because you expect that it's something that is going to materialize in the coming years, or?
Yes, we're very much afraid that could materialize. So, and of course, there have been people working on this issue since the 80s. But I think why it's on the agenda of the international community now is that there have been talks at the United Nations here in Geneva since 2014, and since last year we also have formalized talks in the form of a group of governmental experts that deliberates on the various dimensions of these weapon systems. And for the campaign, of course, this is an opportunity to promote a preventive ban on.
But that's very interesting because, you know, we used to say that governments are always late to regulate, and, you know, that the UN is such a slow bureaucracy that is always 10 years late after the problems. In that particular case, you're actually trying to anticipate on something that does not exist yet.
Yeah, that's...
Or does it, maybe?
Yeah, exactly, right? If we don't know what it is that we're talking about precisely, then it's also difficult to determine whether it does or does not exist. So there are certainly already weapon systems in operation, have been since the 1980s, for example, certain missile defense systems that come close to the description that I gave you earlier. There are so-called Sentry Robots that are deployed today, for example, in the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea, that have the capacity to sense human-shaped objects to them, right? To categorize them, to recognize them with the help of computational intensive algorithms as valid targets, and then to fire. So they have this capacity, but
it's very simple. It's like,
yeah,
I see a human shape, whether it's one of my soldier or an enemy, they're going to shoot it.
Yeah, exactly. That is not possible for a system, and that's one of the concerns also that we have, is that going forward, these kinds of elementary distinctions that we must observe today in war, like we can only target enemy fighters, not civilians, for instance. This kind of elementary distinctions, they are made by human beings within a context, right? We make sense of a certain situation, and we fear that all these elements cannot be adequately encoded into such machines.
Because that's going to be the whole thing, is that right now, you know, some people say code is culture, and you see that by deploying any technology, you actually make assumptions, because on behalf of people, in very mundane thing, and what you say is that we're going to have to encode these decisions into a machine and trust the machine to make the right decision. And that begs the question of, A, can a machine actually accurately follow the rules, and B, who decides what the rules are?
Yeah, I think that's indeed one of the key questions that occupies us in the international talks that are going on, and in other fora as well. I'm always a bit careful, though, with the wording. To my mind, the machines does not make a legal determination. It does not make a moral judgment. The machine calculates, right? So where your considerations come in is at a very early stage of programming, right? And then, of course, these machines, to be effective in military terms, they have to learn. So their code will change, right, on the go. And that presents us with some major, I think it presents major risks, right?
Yeah, the machine learning in that case is a bit weird. Like, we need to kill 1 million people before we can accurately decide who to kill. Okay, that's going to be your problem. But who's developing these machines if somebody's working on it? Like, do you know, and why?
Yeah, so what we know is that states like the US, the UK, Israel, South Korea, Russia, China are investing heavily into ever more autonomous weapon systems. And it is somewhat unclear for many of them where they want to draw the line, at what stage they would say, okay, this is as far as we go, but not further, right? And so our concern is that as the technology allows more and more autonomy in the sense that I described, we will just sort of slither into situations that are neither morally nor legally acceptable.
Ironically, I think as of today, there is a lot of people who wish that American nuclear weapons were managed by a robot.
Yeah. I guess it depends who programmed the robot, right?
I guess, yeah, but he can code.
And how safe the virtual components are of the...
Yeah, exactly. But why would people work on that? What's the motivation behind doing this?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't answer that. So there are there's a military interest in that, and for instance, there are proponents of increasing autonomy in weapon systems. They often say that the pace of war is increasing so much that to respond to threats in a timely manner, they need systems to be autonomous. They also mention that they want munitions to perform even in communications denied environments. And of course, they always mention that they want to protect own forces against the risk of physical harm.
Yeah, that's a big thing. Is there some cost-saving notion involved here?
Yeah, there is also, this argument is sometimes made, but it's not, it's a bit difficult empirically to
prove that
support
it's...
because we've seen with the drones that argument was also made, and it's not turning out to be cheaper.
So there are actually 3 threads among others, but one is really to augment the soldiers that they work in conjunction with technology. Another one we should describe is kind of fake automation. It's like a drone, and there is no pilot, but there's actually a human being that's going to be sitting somewhere in Nevada, for example, in the case of the US. And in that, one of the issue I heard was that it creates a sense of war becomes intangible for the operators, and it's like playing a video game. It's not really playing with human lives. And the other is fully autonomous weapons. So you have kind of these three threads, and I think it's interesting because here we could make a parallel with business, where we hear all the time that we're going to be out of jobs because machines are going to replace us. Do you think it's actually realistic that autonomous weapons are going to be deployed and actually effective in our lifetime?
Well, yeah, considering that there are already systems deployed that have some autonomy in these dimensions, I think it is certainly realistic. But I also believe that such technological developments, especially in the realm of weapons, which I think we should recognize we are having this discussion in a different moral framework than if we speak about cars, right? These technologies are made to harm. So when we speak about these technologies, technological development, then I think we can and we must shape that development. And so it's not like it's inevitable that this is coming. And I think, as you said, for once the UN is fairly is already
anticipating,
anticipating
and dictating the rule instead of the industry or somebody else dictating the rules.
So there is a good chance, or there is a chance, I should say. Of course, at the UN, it's always difficult to find agreement on anything, but there is the possibility that already in 2019 negotiations could start on an instrument, an international treaty on autonomous weapons, and which would draw some lines for the campaign. For instance, we would wish that it in effect preventively bans killer robots, as we call them, right? And that it ensures that whatever weapon systems are developed, that they remain under meaningful human control.
Supervision, yeah. That's the whole point of your discourse. A couple of years ago, it was probably like an issue that was dealt with by a few specialists, including you. In the recent months, there's been Elon Musk stating that he was worried about artificial intelligence in general and weapons in particular. Stephen Hawking also voiced some concern. Like, is it for us as citizens? Like, should we be alarmed, or are these guys, fear-mongering a little bit?
Yeah, it's difficult to say, right? I think depends also a bit what other things you're more or less worried about, right? So I work on other weapons issues as well, including nuclear weapons. So that, at the moment, it trumps my fear. My panic schedule is right up there. So autonomous weapons, comparably less alarming.
Somebody is going to come up with autonomous nuclear weapons soon, so you have more work.
Yes, it has been done. So the notion, I mean. No, I do think, though, that considering some developments also in terms of how we wage war, you mentioned the remoteness, the tendency to be more and more remote from where the violence is actually experienced, right? Some other tendencies in terms of surveillance systems being established. They suggest that we're on a path that makes these kinds of autonomous systems quite likely if we don't intervene.
I heard a very intriguing thought. I think it was 10 years ago. I was attending a conference in Seoul, and there was an expert in weapons, and he was saying that the downside is this remoteness of your action. The plus side is that it's going to mean that armed forces are going to be 50% female, and that maybe that will change the perspective on the way you conduct war, in the sense of now if the physicality happens outside, and you don't need to be strong GI to go to the field.
Yeah, I would like to see some empirical evidence to support that claim. Israel isn't a good example, I think.
It doesn't bring, okay. That was an intriguing thought. I don't remember his name. It's someone. It was 10 years ago, and predicting the future. Who knows what's happening? When you talk about banning these weapons, and at the same time you mention, we think of rogue states. I'm not going to name any names, but is there a point in actually doing a treaty? Like, how can you make sure that it's actually followed and that it has some effects?
Yeah, of course, as with all other issues at the multilateral level, right, there are that there are limitations to the way that we can govern such complex issues like in science and technology governance, right? But it's also, I think, a fact that states, at least, leaving aside other actors, but states recognize that there is a benefit to controlling the development of arms, so controlling proliferation, possession of arms. So arms control, disarmament is a clear goal of the community of states.
Go ahead.
And so I think that there is enough interest to come together and find some common ground on this issue as well. And the advantage here is that it's comparably few states that are actively engaged in research and development in these
weapons,
in
so you can target
technologies.
them. Is there other ways you can intervene? I mean, one, the legal way, so with an international treaty. Are there other ways that you could have, I don't know, incentivize other types of weapon or somehow prevent certain technologies to happen?
No, I think certainly. I mean, treaties are just a formal manifestation of a normative change, right? And I think we can all play a role in promoting or inhibiting certain normative developments. And I'm thinking particularly here of the tech community, right? There are specialists in AI, leaders of tech companies in robotics, AI, who have already taken a public stand against the weaponization of AI in this manner, and they have called in open public letters for the UN to sort of strengthen its efforts to ensure that there are no autonomous weapons beyond meaning for human control. And there are open letters that those of you who are interested can sign up to. They are on the website of the Future of Life Institute.
There was a ban on landmines. How did that go? I mean, is it effectively having an impact?
Oh yes, it's actually a success story, the ban on cluster munitions as well. So, of course, there too, it's a good example. We have a treaty which was not ratified in the very beginning by states that possessed landmines, and then over time, those states also sort of stopped producing and started moving away from these weapons. The same thing with cluster munitions, which many said is a more difficult example because they have more states see military utility in them, and now, or was it last year, I think, the last US companies stopped producing them, although the US is not a party to that treaty, right? So norms have an impact even on states that are not parties, and non-state actors, I should say.
So when we define these autonomous weapon systems, so there is the word system is important, so it's an ecosystem, it's a combination of things. There is the notion of harming people and killing them. Another one is this idea of meaningful human control. Can you dig a little bit into that? Like, what does that mean concretely? Yeah,
it's very vague as a notion, I think, but it has proven useful as a tool to structure the debate. So Article 36 came up with this notion. What we understand by it is that...
so this is what you're requesting. You want weapons to have a meaningful human, to remain and not go further than that.
Exactly. Now what that means, it's a little bit tautological, you could say, right? But so let me give sort of...
well, this is the red line, right? You're on one side, you're okay.
Exactly. That's how we would like to draw the line, right? Because there are other ways to do that. We could define technical characteristics, except it's difficult because we don't know how technology will evolve. So what we propose is that based on what we expect of human beings in the use of weapons today, we can draw out some criteria that help us draw the line on where on autonomous weapon systems or autonomy in weapon systems as well. And so, for example, if we think of a system that detects and attacks targets roaming around freely all over the globe over a prolonged period of time, the so-called hunter-killer scenario, most would agree this is not what we want, right? So, and another thing that most agree is unacceptable would be a system where we would have a human operator in the loop, you could say, but the control that person exercises is limited to pressing a button every time a light comes on. So here we see...
That's not meaningful.
Exactly, that is not meaningful, and that's, of course, these are extreme
so in a way, it's somebody who has to be able to answer in court, for example, for their action. Like somebody, it's a real liability. Like it has to be a real decision, otherwise the weapon is considered autonomous.
Yeah, exactly. So we would then say, so for for us to be able to hold people accountable, responsible politically and legally for the consequences of the use of force, we must bound the independent action of these systems appropriately in spatial terms, in temporal terms, and in terms of the parameters that they may use to construct targets algorithmically.
And I guess the scale is also an issue. Like you don't want one person to control 500 killer robots, while of course armies would like that probably for cost reasons. Is there a connection with the developments we see happening? It's going to be my last question, but there is a lot of AI, there's a lot of robotics. Are you afraid that, is there some concern that what you're doing would stifle innovation in that field, in the civilian world?
Yeah, certainly this concern has been raised, but we don't agree with that because the legal instrument that we are striving for at the UN is limited to disarmament and military or perhaps certain security technologies, right? So it's the weaponization of these systems that is at issue here. And I would even say that it is in the interest of the civilian sector to play a proactive part in that debate, because if you allow, or if we collectively allow these technologies to be weaponized in a manner that does not accord with widespread conceptions of what is right and wrong, that can have a negative impact on the use of these technologies in society more widely.
And armies is an extreme example, but there's a lot of areas where there's going to be friction between humans and AI in the coming years. Yeah. Thank you very much, Maya Brehm.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
People who want to know more about this topic, can you tell us where they can find more information?
Yes, there is a website of the campaign to stop killer robots, for instance. You can find some more information there. Also,
can you give us the website address, or just Google
Stop Killer Robots? You will find it.
Robots. Yeah. Okay.
The website of my organization is Article 36, so you can find that as well quite easily. And then, if you're interested in the talks that take place in Geneva and which are open to people who can, I mean, you have to jump through some procedural hoops as the UN, but they are actually open. So if you're interested in a very different kind of atmosphere for debating things, then you could attend one of these meetings. The next one is scheduled for April.
Thank you very much, Maya.
Thank you.
Thank you.